This lesson is on piece number 7 out of my series called 7 Easy Classical Guitar Songs for Beginners. So this is the final video in this series, which is an introduction to classical guitar by teaching actual pieces of music, very simple beginner level pieces, by giving you step-by-step exercises for how to work on them from the ground up. That's what this whole series is about. To get the most out of this video, I encourage you to start from part 1. There's a link in the description to a playlist of the whole series. Each piece in this series features a different technique, training, and element of expression needed to bring the music alive, which you can apply to any other piece of music that you work on. I also do a harmonic analysis of each piece. If you're wanting an introduction to classical guitar with some easy, playable, and enjoyable pieces to walk away with, then you're in the right place. You can download the sheet music and classical guitar tabs for all the pieces in this series for free. They're inside my solo guitar arrangement pack, along with a bunch of other pieces of music. Just click on the link in the top of the description or go to soundguitarlessons.com/moon to get my solo guitar arrangement pack for free. In this lesson, I'll teach you the 7th piece out of 7 in this series, and we will talk about how to take advantage of being flexible with the time. We don't need to be perfectly on time or metronomic. This can be very expressive for us to play with the time a little bit. Let's get into the lesson. Here's a quick outline of what we're going to cover. I'm going to perform the piece for you so you can hear the whole thing. We'll talk about anything we need to point out about the sheet music. Then I'll give you exercises to work on this from the ground up, just a few for this lesson. Then we'll talk about our element of expression for this lesson, which is being flexible with the time. I'll give you a little bonus tip about what not to do when you recognize chord shapes that you might know in classical guitar music, and then we'll do a harmonic analysis, and after that, at the very end, I will do a slow playthrough of the piece that is intended for you to practice along with. Just a reminder, if you want to follow along, grab the guitar arrangement pack for free with the link in the top of the description if you want to work on this piece with me. This is called Lesson 46 by Julio Sagreras, who was a very famous guitar educator, guitarist from the late Romantic and early 20th century. Has a series of method books that are extremely popular, and I do highly recommend them. So this is Lesson 46. I don't remember what volume this lesson exactly comes from, but it's a great little study for us to work on. So here is the demonstration of it. Let's take a look at the sheet music here. Just 3 things I want to point out. One is notice the triplets, the little brackets that say 3 above the groups of 3 notes. That means there's 3 notes that are fitting into one beat. So instead of a quarter note or 2 eighth notes, it's fitting in 3 eighth notes that are triplets. So triplet eighth notes. And so 3 notes within one. And so the feel, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4 is like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, as you can hear from how the piece works. And then it says simile there because it doesn't want to crowd up the entire sheet music by having that going the whole time. It's just saying keep it going like that. Same with the fingerings where it's saying I am, showing us the plucking hand fingerings. It's saying simile after that, meaning just keep going with that pattern unless it indicates otherwise. So that's you'll see that a lot in sheet music if it's just a study or an etude that is kind of one-dimensional and just you're doing the same thing the whole time. Can keep the sheet music nice and clean there. And the last thing I want to point out about the sheet music is that all of these notes are intended to ring together per chord, per measure. The harmony changes every measure, kind of. And so this is meant to all ring together. I'm just pointing that out. It's obvious if you started playing it or if you're listening to it, or but the way this is written, where you see these triplet eighth notes, like if a computer program read this, you would not hear all those notes ringing together because it's not showing ties and it's not saying explicitly that this is just a broken up chord. So this is all arpeggiating a chord. It's just a chord progression with a beautiful kind of plucking hand arpeggio pattern. So all of those notes are intended to ring together. I'm just pointing that out because it's kind of case by case in guitar music where if it sounds right, if it sounds like eighth notes are supposed to actually just overlap each other, if it sounds like you're just playing outlining a chord, arpeggiating a chord, then it's probably supposed to ring together. Other times, strings of eighth notes like this or triplets like this are meant to be melody, and they're not supposed to ring together even if they're crossing strings and whatnot. So that is a little bit open to interpretation. When do you let them ring? When do you not? I say totally by intuition, it's pretty obvious. But that's just an interesting thing about guitar music. There's nothing that tells us let these ring. It just should be obvious that it's a specific chord. And we'll come back to that specific chord thing in a second, because a lot of these chords you're going to recognize, and you're going to recognize kind of hand shapes for them as well. But let's get into our exercises next for how I recommend working on this. Okay, the first exercise I recommend is just right hand. Surprise, surprise. We've done that a lot in this series. And the top notes of this arpeggio pattern are staying on the same strings the whole time. So if you check out what's happening up there, that's happening consistently on the whole piece. So the exercise I want us to start with is rotating through what our thumb is doing while having the upper part stay the same. So starting on the lowest string, we'll go, which is kind of cool. That's just an E minor chord. But then switch to the A root, and then D. Kind of meditative. I could sit and work on that for a long time, because as I do that, I hear and feel all the little things I want to be more consistent at. And I don't like moving on until those things are dealt with, or much more confident, or I hit a milestone that I'm looking for. So work on that exact exercise. I'll do it again real slowly for you. And just loop through it like that. So that's exercise 1. I really like doing that kind of thing. Exercise 2 is I want you to do the same thing on each harmony that it's happening in the piece, and you just go as long as you want until you want to switch. Now we're just starting to piece together the piece here, because it's just a series of arpeggios. So first measure is holding this. This is an A minor chord. And just feel good about that. And then when you feel good about that, switch to the next one. Okay, what's the next one? Obviously a little thumb missing there. My thumbnail's so tiny right now. Okay, next measure. You can keep it going. You can connect it to if you want. This is measure 3. Here's measure 4. I'll say, okay, I'm good on measure 3, etc. So take your time. We're kind of just getting into the piece statically, little by little. Now, something I haven't recommended yet. Well, kind of, I have, but explicitly the exercise I would do next. And you can apply any of the exercises from this whole series to anything. Go with what is causing you trouble, what you think, but do break down some ways to work on a song, a piece, work, whatever, especially with solo guitar, that is not just barreling through from the beginning, not just kind of brute force trying to memorize it. We want to be a little more elegant with our approach than that. So the next thing I want you to do is go back and forth between each pair of 2 measures. So this first, and then measure 2, and then back. Until you're comfortable with it. The more methodical, the better. I haven't mentioned the metronome here. I like the metronome as kind of a graded way to work towards checking things off, so I can be very sure, oh, I did it at this tempo this many times, and that kind of gives me a milestone to work towards in a practice session. And it's not about it's a certain tempo being the right tempo for the piece of music, and it's certainly not about needing to be metronomic in our playing, which we're going to talk about very soon, but it's about saying, I know that I worked on, you can come back the next day and know you're working at the same tempo, but you don't need to either. You can just say, can I play those 2 accurately? Now measure 2 to 3, which is surprisingly hard. It can be, to get that pinky to come down right where you want it to on the D note, 3rd fret, 2nd string, 4th finger. And back and forth. Okay, you get get the idea. Then you do 3 and 4. So, and then, so I love this looping. It doesn't always have to be 2 measures, but looping is great. If you can loop every 2 measures, then you've done every transition, connected it, and then it's just a matter of piecing it all together. And that would be exercise 4. And if you know from any of my other lessons in this channel, I like to have exercises lead naturally to the last quote unquote exercise being the thing that is the real music, the full piece, the goal in the end. So we're kind of giving ourselves these stepping stones. And then when you take this natural next step, you say, hey, I'm doing it now. This often the last exercise, I call it the you're doing it exercise, because you get to the final goal instead of that seeming overwhelming. So that would be the final thing to do. Obviously, just work on it. Work on playing the whole thing after you've connected all of those together. Let's move on to our element of expression, being flexible with the time. So in this piece, I would like to feature the idea of being flexible with the time. I did do this in my demonstration, and I just want to introduce it to you so you're aware that you're allowed to be flexible with the time, and it can feel right or feel wrong depending on the piece of music, and often depending on the era. The Romantic era, which is the 1830 to 1900 or so, Romantic era in music, is more appropriate for meshing around with the time than, say, the Baroque era with Bach or Classical era. Classical era works too in its own way, but this kind of overdoing it just to be extremely emotive, but I do like it. Probably to most people's taste, they think that's overdoing it, but you're the artist. You can decide for yourself. I like it quite a bit. Some days, some moments, depends on how you're feeling. That's the expressive part. Really can work quite well for this piece. Kind of start slow, a little bit faster. Notice I'm kind of using volume as well, and not just volume, but also tension. So measure 3, where it's an E dominant 7th chord, which we'll talk about in a second, there's much more tension, and it makes me want to add volume and intensity and speed up, all of that together. And then when it resolves, kind of relax. It's like it's breathing. It's like the piece is breathing. Same with this measure 5. A7 to D minor. Again, we'll do an analysis in a moment, but that's this. Now that you could do it the other way too. Slow. It can go any way you want. So just, you're allowed to play with it, very allowed to play with it. I have a strong memory of a student who was extremely serious about classical guitar. I taught him for many months to prepare for a college audition to major in classical guitar. And nearing his recital, he would come and play full pieces that he's been working on. And one of the lessons, he was working so seriously with the metronome that his playing without the metronome just sounded too metronomic. It sounded too much. And that was my number one thing to kind of help guide him towards, say, don't be so, stop using the metronome. Start being expressive with the time. So that's just my lesson here. You can apply that to other things, but this piece, it works well for this little study. It's kind of fun. And if you play it straight with the time, it'll also sound great. So you also don't have to do that. Let's move on to a little bonus tip that I have for you. Okay, critical bonus tip here, and that is that if you recognize any chords, if you maybe think of this first chord as A minor, 2 things. 1, don't use the full shape that you think of as the chord. Don't put down any fingers that you're not needing. You want to play, just put down the notes that are actually in the music and not any more than that. But 2, extremely important, is to not place the chord shape all at once, like some of us might be used to doing, playing songs, strumming, switching chords, that kind of thing. Don't jump to something. For example, great spot to bring this to your attention is measure 6, which is straight up a D minor chord. So if you recognize that as the most common version of D minor on the guitar that anyone's ever played, and you say, I know that chord, I've played that before, it's D minor. So when you get to that measure, you just jump to that chord shape. And it's not till beat 2 that we even need this. It's not till the 4th note in the measure that you even need this F note, this first fret there. So you don't want to go to this shape. You want to play this open D, and then when you need it, you place down this, and then you place down the next note, and then you place the next one. Just like that. I'm going to start from measure 5 slowly, and watch how when I get to that chord, I put each down as I need it. Might be hard to see even at that tempo, but I'm not jumping to a chord shape. That causes way more tension, so that's bad. But it also doesn't sound good because there's sounds that happen by just putting your fingers down even if you haven't plucked it yet. And sometimes that can also cut off other sounds that are supposed to be ringing. So do not jump to chord shapes. And this relates to a tip earlier in the series, which is that you do just want to put your fingers down as you need them. And the kind of third version of this same tip is don't play a fuller chord shape of something that is not needed. So measure 5, if you know this chord shape as A7, where you're, right now my first finger's on fret 2, string 4, and fret 2, string 2 with my other finger. Well, this note here is not needed. It's A7, but it's just using the top 3 strings. It's skipping the 4th string. So again, I just can't emphasize that enough. Watch out for that. Okay, a lot of times if a G chord is being used in a piece, but this note is not being played, people will still play this full G chord. You want to not have that, only have the notes that you're actually needing. So major, major bonus tip there that applies to all your solo guitar playing in any genre. Let's move on to a harmonic analysis. It's going to be similar to a lot of the harmonic progressions that have been throughout this series. What has been happening? We've been having the 1 chord of the key, which is the tonic chord, the main chord of the key, and then the 5 chord of the key, which is the dominant chord of the key. And just a lot of progressions are that over and over again. Let's check it out. Measure 1 is A minor. We're in the key of A minor. Measure 2 is E major. Okay, that is the 5 chord of A minor. So we have the 1 chord and the 5 chord. Awesome. Measure 3 is E dominant 7. Just adds the 7 to it, adds the flat 7 to it to be specific, with the 4th finger there on the D note. So E dominant 7. So we're still on the 5 chord as a dominant 7th chord. Then measure 4 is A minor again. Okay. Then measure 5 is A dominant 7. Ooh, we talked about this. I can't remember if it was the last video in the series, but maybe the one before that. Secondary dominant is what it's called. I'll link again in the description of this video to my chord theory series, from the ground up, huge series. If you want to know more about theory, there's a video about secondary dominance. I'll put a link to that as well. Chromatic chord. So this is A dominant 7 in the key, from the key of, we're in the key of A minor, but A dominant 7 now is modulating us temporarily, creating a tonic feeling towards D minor. So it's just temporarily pointing towards D minor, which is the next chord. Measure 5 is A7. Measure 6 is D minor. Now, did we modulate? No, I shouldn't have used that word. We're tonicizing. So as soon as we land on measure 6 on D minor, we are still in the key of A minor. We're on the 4 chord of A minor. And we just created some tension to get there. Then measure 7, we're back to A minor for half of it, but with a very specific thing that classical music is often doing, which is that it's the tonic chord in the second inversion. So there's an E in the bass. So it's A minor over E. And we could call it that as like a slash chord kind of thing. But really it's A minor second inversion, which means that the 5th of the chord is in the bass. This is very purposeful at the resolution of a piece, like in the end of the piece in this case. Because then it's going to go next to an actual E chord, which is the 5. So we're doing like a 1-5-1. So the last chord, obviously it lands on A minor. So we have A minor, E, A minor, 1-5-1. But that first one has E in the bass, so that the very final measure, when we land on A, it actually sounds like an arrival point. If we just had a normal A minor at measure 7 and then an E and then back to a normal A minor, we don't have this sense of, oh, we've arrived somewhere that we have not been for a while, because it's been a while. It's been several measures since we had the normal A minor. So we have this E in the bass creating less stability. It's less stable. And then E major and then A minor. Another way to think of that at measure 7, that A minor with E in the bass, is that it's almost like a suspended E chord. It's almost like an E chord that has a suspension. It's like E sus4 and also has the C note in it. Now, if any of this is over your head, don't worry. That's fine. Maybe a little bit helps. Maybe some of it's confusing. A lot of what we hear the first time is just confusing and it's exposure. And when it's a lesson like this where I'm wanting to give you these side notes and extra analysis and it's not 100% about understanding that from the ground up, that's okay. I just want to talk like musicians talk. I want to talk like we were sitting in a lesson together and just exposure, exposure, exposure. So that is our harmonic analysis. One of the biggest takeaways is just how simple it is with all the pieces in this whole series. I'll do my slow demonstration next, which is intended for you to work on practicing along with, it's so good to have a concrete goal and milestone to work towards. So if you like this piece and want to work on it, you can work on practicing along with my slow demonstration coming up in 1 second. Remember, you can get the sheet music for free if you want to work on it and follow along with the link in the top of the description, or go to soundguitarlessons.com/moon. You'll get my whole solo guitar arrangement pack, which has this and all the other pieces in this series and a ton of other music, some of it quite difficult and advanced, some of it much easier, and a lot of stuff in between. Let's do this slow demonstration next. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a... That's it for this lesson, and that's it for the final video in this series. I post a new lesson video every week. I hope to see you in another lesson soon. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, and happy practicing.